Within 2 months, the Parliament of Latvia also passed a declaration of independence from the USSR. Then on June 12, 1990, the Russian SSR, the largest republic in the Soviet Union, declared its sovereignty. Not quite a declaration of independence, but pretty close to that. By the end of the year, there were declarations of either independence or sovereignty in every one of the 15 Soviet republics. Quite naturally, these enormous changes unleashed by Gorbachev's actions and inactions at critical stages were viewed with great misgivings by many of the old line leaders of the Communist Party and the Soviet Army. In August 1991, some of these staged a coup d'etat. Gorbachev was arrested, and it appeared that the coup leaders might succeed in reversing many of his reforms. However, other prominent leaders within the Soviet Union, most notably Boris Yeltsin, the head of the Russian Republic, opposed the coup, as did the bulk of the Russian population, and the coup collapsed in a few days. After the failure of the coup, events moved with astonishing speed. The Communist Party was promptly thrown out of power, its activities banned, and its property seized. Furthermore, by the end of the year, all the component republics of the USSR had seceded, and the Soviet Union was formally dissolved. Those leaders who had wished to merely reform the communist system were quickly pushed aside by those such as Yeltsin, who wished to eliminate it entirely. Gorbachev himself resigned from office in December 1991. This leads us to the next question. Just how responsible is Gorbachev personally for the changes which occurred during the years in office? Various economic reforms were made in the USSR under his leadership. However, it seems to me that he deserves rather little credit in this respect. In general, reforms were forced on him by the obvious failures of the Soviet system, and the reforms that he did make were too little and too late. In fact, the poor performance of the Soviet economy was a leading cause of Gorbachev's eventual downfall. On the other hand, Gorbachev deserves a good deal of credit for his role in the freeing of Eastern Europe. 6 countries have been liberated from Soviet control, and this change is unlikely to be reversed. Nor can Gorbachev's personal influence in what occurred be doubted. The movements for reform in Eastern Europe had all been stimulated by the liberalization within Russia itself, and had been heartened by his repeated statements that he was willing to let the East European countries go their own way. Furthermore, at the crucial moment in October 1989, when the mass demonstrations in East Germany began, Gorbachev intervened personally. In similar circumstances, previous Soviet leaders had always called out the troops and used whatever brutality was needed to suppress the rebels. However, in October 1989, Gorbachev stepped in to persuade the Honecker regime not to repress the demonstration by force. We have seen the consequences of that decision. Similarly, Gorbachev's decision not to use military force to crush the Lithuanian revolt led fairly quickly to the secession of other Soviet republics. Also important was Gorbachev's influence on arms limitation and on ending the Cold War. Many people have suggested that Ronald Reagan deserves a good deal of the credit for this. In the first place, by demonstrating that the United States was far better able than the Soviet Union to bear the cost of the arms race, he played an important part in convincing the Soviet leaders that they had to bring an end to the Cold War. Furthermore, they argue since it necessarily takes two parties to make an agreement, credit for the arms limitation treaty should at least be shared equally between Gorbachev and Reagan. Such a view would be correct if the Cold War had been equally the fault of the United States and the Soviet Union. However, that was not the case. The Cold War was caused by the military expansionism of Stalin and his successors, and the American response was basically a defensive reaction. As long as Soviet leaders clung to their dream of imposing communism on the world, the West had no way other than surrender of ending the conflict. When a Soviet leader appeared who was willing to abandon that goal, the seemingly interminable Cold War soon melted away. Gorbachev deserves even more credit for the political changes he caused within the Soviet Union. The lessening of the power of the Communist Party, the growth of glasnost, the remarkable advances in press freedom and freedom of speech, the general democratization of the country, none of these would have gone nearly as far as they did had it not been for Gorbachev. Glasnost was not something forced on him by popular pressure, nor was it a policy which the other Politburo members were insisting on. It was Gorbachev's idea, and he promoted it and continued to support it despite considerable opposition. It was glasnost, perhaps more than anything else, which permitted the final overthrow of the Soviet system. That this revolutionary change has taken place without significant violence, at least so far, is truly remarkable, and is surely due in no small part to Gorbachev's policies and conduct in office. It has been remarked that some of the most important results of Gorbachev's action, such as the reunification of Germany, the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the demise of communism, were never intended by him. That may be so, but it does not diminish his importance. The influence of a political leader, or anyone else, is determined by the effect of his actions, not by his intentions. Many other persons, of course, most of them fervent anti communists, contributed to the defeat of Marxism. Ex communists such as Arthur Koestler and Whittaker Chambers, who alerted the West to the true nature of the communist system. Soviet dissidents such as Andrei Sakharov, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who risked their lives to speak out within Russia. Guerrilla fighters such as the rebels in Afghanistan, Angola, and Nicaragua, who fought bravely to prevent communist governments from securing power in those countries, and political leaders in the United States, such as Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan, who used American arms, American financial resources, and the example of American freedom and prosperity to resist the spread of communism and to ultimately defeat it. Still, despite the efforts of all those persons and many more, when Gorbachev took office in 1985, no one anticipated that the demise of the communist empire was close at hand. Indeed, had someone like Lenin or Stalin been selected in 1985 to head the Soviet state, that repressive government might still be standing and the Cold War still continuing. However, it was not a Stalin but rather Mikhail Gorbachev who was chosen in 1985 to head the Soviet Union, though he never intended to dismantle the Soviet Union and the Communist Party that had ruled it since its creation. The policies that he adopted and the forces that he set in motion had that result. Regardless of his intentions, he has changed our world irrevocably.